Kiribati, the country that's drowning. There are developing countries and endangered species. The Republic of Kiribati is a dying country. Lost in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this little paradise seems destined to be swallowed up by global warming. A country which is afraid of disappearing is in the process of buying land from its neighboring country in order to be able to move all its population there. The international negotiations on the climate are not advancing. These words are those of Julien Blanc-Gras, a French globe-trotting journalist and writer, who has returned with a new book, his fourth, entitled Paradise Before Liquidation. Here, he evokes a land endangered by climate change. In today's video, we are going to talk about the Kiribati Islands, an endangered country. Before we continue, if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Born in 1976 in Gap, Julien Blanc-Gras is a French journalist by profession and a traveler by vocation. He has published 3 novels: Gringoland, How to Become a Living God in 2008, an apocalyptic comedy, and in 2011, Tourist. The book Paradise Before Liquidation, published on May 28, 2014 by Mr. Blanc-Gras, is the testimony of 2 months spent, in September and October 2012, in Kiribati. 2 months of meetings with locals and expatriates on assignment in this island threatened by climate change, even though it itself emits very little CO2. Visiting the Kiribati Islands before they disappear was Blanc-Gras' avowed goal when he decided to fly to the South Pacific. Blanc-Gras said this: "I favored the form of a travelogue. I wanted to show the human face of climate change, how we live in a country suspended by such a threat." In a light tone, he tells us in this book his impressions of travel, the inhabitants, their way of life, and the insoluble problems they face. A book that may give food for thought on our way of life, but which serves above all as a witness for the inhabitants of Kiribati. Blanc-Gras puts his finger on a sensitive subject, even more today, and informs his reader while keeping a light and funny tone. Through his book, he sheds new light on this little-known region, on the sidelines of globalization and yet on the front line in the face of the climate threat. The Kiribati Islands were a British colony until 1979, which oddly coincided with the depletion of the phosphate deposits that were the country's main source of income. In Kiribati, there are about 11 million palm trees. In this country, the preservation of vegetation is a sensitive subject. A third of the Kiribati government's revenue is generated by the sale of fishing licenses. The sea feeds the people of Kiribati as much as it threatens them. In his book, Blanc-Gras shares a description of the things he experienced and saw during his trip to this small island. He tells us about his trip to the islands of Kiribati, islands in danger. The postcard photos are far from the author's first impressions of the trip. The sea is very polluted, and it is better to avoid swimming in it. The beaches are filled with excrement as many inhabitants do not have toilets. The poverty is extreme. The country relies heavily on international aid to ensure its survival. Pure and safe water is also a problem. It is polluted and infiltrated by seawater. The inhabitants are allowed only 20 liters of water per day. In addition to all this, some places in the country suffer from overcrowding. Unemployment is important to note, infant mortality too. Storms often ravage the coasts. Some have given up and sink into idleness and alcoholism. Others struggle or try to leave for a better life elsewhere. As Kiribati is surrounded by sea, its citizens contemplate the vastness of the ocean daily. Unfortunately, the people are poor and dependent on significant international aid. With population exoduses to the capital, which causes sanitation and overcrowding problems, a threatened way of life and a chaotic insertion of modernity into daily life. There is of course the absence of tourists in Kiribati. Kiribati is a rather complicated country to access because it is very far in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The best way to get there is by plane, but it is very expensive. Also, in Kiribati there is not too much infrastructure, for example hotels for tourists. This is a big disadvantage of the country. In relation to climate change, it is a serious problem that the inhabitants of the country experience every day. Another problem facing this country is sea level rise. When sea levels rise rapidly on an island, even a small rise can have devastating effects on coastal habitats. It can cause destructive erosion and flooding, contaminate agricultural soils with salt, and can lead to loss of habitats for fish, birds and plants. Of this country which shrinks in front of the ocean, and which is threatened by the rising waters due to the rise of the world thermometer, Blanc-Gras describes in his book about a fisherman who every day carries stones for strengthen the dike that protects his house. It is not uncommon to see water invade the few main roads of Kiribati and invite itself right to the doorsteps of houses. Some buildings, too close to the shore, have already been washed away, and their inhabitants have packed their bags. These sad situations are only the surface of the problem, says Blanc-Gras at the end of his trip. He adds that seawater infiltration threatens precious freshwater supplies. This island risks being uninhabitable before being swallowed up, he says in his book. Definitely, thousands of Pacific Islanders will be tested by a more hostile climate in the years to come. But there is also poverty and overcrowding on Tarawa, the main island and capital of Kiribati, home to some 50,000 people, or half of Kiribati's total population. Tarawa itself is in danger of being permanently submerged in water. Faced with the threat of climate change, a question arises: should Kiribatis jump ship with dignity or fight to sustain their homeland? Citizens and politicians are divided on which solution to choose. Some still believe that such a situation can be avoided if adequate infrastructure is put in place. On the future of the country, two movements clash: that of migration with dignity, of which Anote Tong was the ambassador, and that of stay and fight, carried by the current president Tanati Muamwa. In 2014, Kiribati's president Anote Tong purchased a plot of land in Fiji. The purpose of this process was to obtain a place to relocate its citizens. Blanc-Gras describes this in his book. In March 2012, I saw an agency dispatch explaining that the government had bought a piece of land in Fiji, in order to eventually move part of the population there. I had wanted to go see it. According to Tanati Muamwa, the people of Kiribati must be able to live in their homes despite climate change. Consequently, Mr. Muamwa called on the experts to submit innovative projects to him, but it will be difficult to implement such projects without the support of international bodies. To finance its survival, the Republic of Kiribati relies on two actors: on the one hand, NGOs and egos, on the other, the expat community. Hundreds of young people have taken the direction of Australia or New Zealand to be hired as seasonal workers and send scholarships to their country of origin. They are currently more than 100 working in the islands of New Zealand, in vineyards and horticultural crops. In the eyes of the Kiribati government, this foreign labor is an invaluable resource. Some still call Mr. Tong the Mahatma Gandhi of the Pacific because of his struggle to save the nations of Oceania. According to Dennis Wesselbaum, a researcher at the University of Otago, climate change has become the main factor of human migration in the world, ahead of wars and economic reasons. In 2017, 68.9 million people had to leave their homes to escape the consequences of global warming. The people of Kiribati are not the only ones affected by the drama of the rising waters. Their neighbors Tuvalu, Micronesia and Tonga are also on the front line. Fortunately, an organization called the Alliance of Small Island States has been created to represent the interests of island states threatened by climate change. The organization now has 44 members and fights alongside Kiribati to make the voice of the islands heard. We have reached the end of our video. Thanks for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing topics. See you soon in our new video.